Andy Thomson, thank you so much for joining me once again. I think this is maybe our third episode that we filmed together, and I'm really, really excited to see this extended presentation you're providing for us on why we believe in gods, which is a book you wrote, and it's also just a really fascinating topic that I can't wait to see what you deep dive into and what you've added since last time we spoke. I didn't want to just use the video from last time. I wanted to give you another chance to kind of just present slides and visuals and all those things that I think really are important for people to see and to learn about and to hear straight from the source. But enough from me. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what are we going to be talking about today?
Certainly. I'm a psychiatrist. Currently, I'm at University of Virginia Student Health Services, general psychiatrist, and basically what you're seeing was born on 9/11. My son was in the World Trade Center complex and fortunately survived, and it led me to research suicide terrorism. And in the process of researching suicide terrorism, I stumbled into, and this is 20 years ago, I stumbled into all the work that was already done at that time on how human minds generate religious belief, why we're vulnerable to generate religious belief, why the nature of the beliefs that we generate. And it stunned me that this was not more widely known, that it wasn't part of Psychology 101 textbooks. And that led to researching it, to giving presentations, and then ultimately to writing the little book with Claire Aquifer, Why We Believe in Gods. And since my book, there are other people, and you'll hear about some of them, who have continued to develop this. And the main point of this is that we know a lot more than most people realize about what makes us vulnerable to religious beliefs, the specific religious beliefs, why we're vulnerable to accept them, to adhere to them, to behave in line with them, and to spread them to other people. We really are starting to understand that full psychology, and the hope is that this becomes more widely known.
Absolutely. I think we talked a little bit about this before we were officially on the record, but I think the accessibility is the important part. You're making this information accessible to everybody, not just higher level academics, not just people pursuing PhDs. You're making sure that this information and these ideas are accessible to anybody who has access to picking up the book and reading it. And for anybody who's listening or watching, I've linked the book in the description of this video or audio, depending on what platform you're looking at. So if you're interested after this presentation in picking up a copy, you can find the direct link in the description. But other than that, Dr. Andy Thomson, I'm going to let you take over from here.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me emphasize what you just said. It is accessible. I hope what you will see from this presentation in the audience is that you don't need a scientific education. These are basic, fundamental human mechanisms that we use every day, all day. They're part of our humanity, and they've been hijacked and utilized to create religious belief for multiple reasons. And that's what I hope people take away. They don't have to be intimidated by this. It goes to the basic aspects of human nature that they see in their own lives every day. Let me start with an important quote. On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind since the beginning of the world have been fighting, quarreling, and burning and torturing one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. That statement was made by Thomas Jefferson in 1816. And really, the essence of my talk today is this. Should you run into Thomas Jefferson this week, you could say to him, no, Mr. President, religion is no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. We increasingly have, and we're getting close to, a comprehensive cognitive psychological science of religious belief. And we are in that situation today, because when you made that statement in a letter in 1816, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would grow up to give us the only workable explanation we have for the design and architecture of all life on Earth, but even more specifically, would give us the only workable explanation we have for the design and architecture of the human mind and the pieces of the human mind that evolve that lead to religious belief. Darwin wrote his great book published it in 1859, The Origin of the Species. And he knew at that time that his theory of evolution by natural selection would change how we understand psychology. It took about 150 years before people started to really apply it systematically to understanding psychology and cognitive neuroscience and neuroscience. What are my goals today? My goals are, first and foremost, that you get a handle on some of these mechanisms so that you can intuitively, almost automatically, understand where some of the elements of religious belief come from. And you can, if you get into debates with believers, you can show how aspects of their beliefs are really just byproducts of everyday mechanisms that they're using all the time. You can show them, for instance, why they're vulnerable to believe in souls and the afterlife. That's some of what we're going to be talking about. And the other goal I have is that this is not done from a place of memorization where you just rotely memorize it. I'm going to try to present this so that you literally grasp it and can turn around tonight and explain it to somebody. Now, I was thinking about, a roadmap. Let me give you a little bit of a roadmap here about where we're going to go and the things that you're going to hear. But before I do that, I just want to pause for a moment and thank a number of people. First and foremost, Ms. Davis, for having me here again, for giving me the opportunity to present this material to you. I am deeply grateful for her work, for her podcast, for what she's been doing, and also, for the opportunity to be here today and to give this talk, in a sense, give it again with a little bit more so that hopefully this information gets out. I also want to thank my co-author, Claire Alcafer, also the Center for Inquiry, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, the numerous people, and you'll hear about many of them, who have helped me put this together, both in the book and in these presentations. One way of thinking about it actually comes from John Wathay, who you'll hear about. And his view of it, it's sort of like the periodic table. In the periodic table, each element has a specific function, and together they give us the chemistry of life. And what I'm going to be doing is giving you pieces of, in a sense, the periodic table of religious belief, the specific pieces, some of them that come together to form our vulnerability to religious belief. And where we're going to go, let me give you a little bit of a roadmap here. We're going to talk about evolution, the basic, the modern Darwinian synthesis. We're going to talk about human evolution. I made a little list here so you get the roadmap. We're going to talk about something called eusociality. We're like insects in our group behavior. We're going to go through the basic byproduct theory of religious belief. And it's like, and I'll show you, it's like reading and writing. We're going to go through the theory that shows you that if you understand the psychology of junk food and pornography, you will understand the psychology of religious belief. Then we're going to take a deep dive into some of the crucial mechanisms, the attachment system, what are known as hard to fake, costly honest signals of commitment. We're going to go through the reasons that all of us are vulnerable to think about or believe in souls or an afterlife. We're going to talk about something called hyperactive agency detection mechanisms, minimally counterintuitive worlds that create some of the religious worlds that we believe in. And then I'm going to finish up with the neurobiology of ritual and show you that it is actually pretty simple. You don't need a neuroscience degree to understand some of the basic neurobiology of ritual, and that goes into to fueling and making religious ideas and religious beliefs so powerful. And as we go through this, I'm going to rely on the moderator to ask questions that she has and that she thinks you all might have. All right, let's go to the let's start with the modern Darwinian synthesis. And this is, I think, how most people see it, that the evolution by natural selection operates at the level of the individual. That's not quite right, okay? Evolution by natural selection operates at the level of the gene, at the level of DNA. I think the slide is blocked here. It says life's slim volume spirally bound, and from the Australian poet Les Murray. And if you step back from it for a moment, that's going to make sense, because what's the fundamental unit of life? It's the gene, it's DNA. So that's where natural selection is going to operate. And this is the basis of the modern Darwinian synthesis. This is one of the best statements of the modern Darwinian synthesis that you will see. Every organism, you and me, a worm, a bird, a banana, every organism is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote, in a specific way, the survival of the genes that built those adaptations. What does this mean? My heart solves the problem of pumping blood. My lungs solve the problem of extracting oxygen from the air. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting that oxygen. At every single level of biological inquiry, there's Darwinian natural selection. Now, if it operates at the level of the gene, then there's something very important here. Our thoughts, our feelings are designed by our genes for our genes' purposes, not necessarily our own. Most of the time, there is most of the time there's an overlap, or there's a concordance between self-interest and genetic interest. But if there's a conflict, genetic interest usually is going to win. Why is that important? Okay, the modern Darwinian synthesis actually illustrates how you can have the evolution of suicide. There are situations where my death is more valuable to my genes than my life. If I'm a burden on kin in ancestral environments, I'm sorry?
Oh, I just said interesting.
Yes.
That's so interesting.
If I'm a burden on my kin in ancestral environments, let's say I have 3 children, each one of them has 50% of my genes. Okay, if I'm a burden on them and I kill myself and it allows for their survival, that's 150% increase in my genes. That's a huge increase, right? And it only takes about a 2% genetic advantage for a trait to become part of an organism. So the modern Darwinian synthesis, for instance, helps us understand suicide, and I think suicide tragically illustrates some of the modern Darwinian synthesis. A more recent example, think of the trouble some of our politicians get into by having affairs and having children that they then have to hide. Well, that's a great advantage for their genes, but it oftentimes destroys their career and is clearly damaging to their self-interest. So again,
and this is also very interesting, because I feel like in order to explain this, you also have to help people understand and realize that there are so many processes going on biologically that they have no control over. Everybody thinks that they have full autonomy, but this idea that your genetics and your genes have an entirely separate list of priorities and goals, and sometimes those align with yours mentally, but other times your body's going to continue to do what it wants to do, whether you give it permission or not, and it begs the larger question of autonomy.
Absolutely. And the whole issue of free will. And For those interested in it, look at Robert Sapolsky's recent work. But some of you may remember Senator John Edwards, who was certainly headed towards the presidency. And if you remember, he had a child with someone not his wife, and it blew up and destroyed his political career. But he, had another child. His genes were successful. And in his particular case, he had had a child die in a car accident. So his genes produced another organism, but at great expense to him. Another way of thinking about this, let me actually go back, because I want to look at this. The modern Darwinian synthesis, this is also a statement about the human mind that's crucial to our subject today. So the mind is what the brain does. And so look at this statement as: every mind brain is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote, in some specific way, the survival of the genes that directed the construction of those adaptations. So you're looking at me, I'm an upside-down two-dimensional image on your retina. Complex adaptations turn that into the three-dimensional view. What we are going to be talking today about are social adaptations. And it's those social adaptations designed by natural selection. It's those social adaptations, the attachment system, all sorts of things that go into constructing religions. Another way of thinking about this is that the mind-brain is like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft? It's this complex array, complex array of engineering devices solving a constant stream of problems, only some of which are conscious to the astronauts. So our minds are constantly solving all sorts of problems, and very few of them are actually conscious to us. When we look at a person, there are innumerable social adaptations trying to figure out who they are, male, female, big, small. Do I know them? Do I not know them? What are they thinking? What are their views of me? Are they formidable? Are they weak? Are they an ally? Or are they potential enemy? We're making just myriad judgments about people that, only some of that becomes conscious to it. And it's some of those social judgment mechanisms that go into religion. So that's the modern Darwinian synthesis. Let's look at human evolution. There's a wonderful statement. I don't remember the author, but we are risen apes, not fallen angels. And that we are, in essence, African apes. And it is very hard for us to get our minds around the time sequences involved in human evolution, but it's crucial that we do. And what's interesting about Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, if you've not read it, the elephant in the room, so to speak, or the unacknowledged guest at the banquet that is the origin of the species, was human beings. He mentioned them only once, though everybody knew that this is what he was ultimately talking about. And he said, and he knew, even in the 1850s, that we would ultimately know the origin of man and his history. He already had a sense that we came from African primates, African apes. When he exactly speculated that, we don't know, but he put it into print. I don't think we know, but he didn't put it into print until the 1870s, but it was not in The Origin of Species. But he knew. All right. So how do we get our heads around the time sequences, the time sequence here? And this is important for understanding religious belief, because the basic mechanisms evolved in environments that are mercifully long gone. Think about today, the 24 hours of today. And each hour is 100,000 years. So today, December 30th, is 2.4 million years. So our genus Homo shows up at midnight last night. Homo habilis in Africa, midnight last night. About 6 o'clock this morning, some of our ancestors started to leave Africa. about 1.8 million years ago. And about lunchtime today, some of them made it into what is present-day Europe. And it's not until 6 p.m. tonight that our immediate ancestor, who may or may not be Homo heidelbergensis, shows up in Africa. Neanderthals and some of those ancestors went into Europe. They became Neanderthal about 9 o'clock at night. Some of those ancestors remained in Africa, and they became Homo sapiens somewhere 9, 10 o'clock tonight. So 200, 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, ancient Homo sapiens show up sometime, we don't know, but maybe 11:20 at night, fully modern, you and me, Homo sapiens, show up in Africa. It is not until 6 minutes before midnight that we start to settle down into agricultural communities in the Near East and begin the process that leads to civilization. And as you'll hear at the end, we may have started to settle into agricultural communities, not to make food, but to make better beer. We may owe civilization to beer, but we'll get there. And that is connected to religion. So
Interesting.
you've got to keep in mind that for most of our evolutionary history as Homo, our genus Homo, we're in small kin-based groups in Africa. And even as fully formed Homo sapiens, 90% of the time, again, small kin-based groups in Africa. And that's the furnace that fired the evolution of us, of human beings, of Homo sapiens.
And I love that idea of comparing a timeline to a clock, because I feel
Yes.
like, one, it's just such a visual representation that I feel like a lot of people might understand if the timeline is kind of confusing to them. And also, it just goes to show you how, in the grand scheme of things, in the timeline or the clock of planet Earth, we as human beings have been here for such a short
Oh,
blip of
yeah.
time. We've made such a massive impact in such a microscopic,
Yeah.
in basically a couple of days in the timeline of the entirety of the universe. And I just think that's amazing. I think that comparison is
Oh,
really, really cool.
yeah. I'm always stunned by it.
Right.
2.4 million years seems like a long time, but in the billions of years of life, it's just a flash. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Wow.
It just, yeah, and just the timeline of, our gene, and that's just our genus. I mean, you have to remember
Right.
Lucy is 4 or 5 million years. I mean, our common ancestor with chimps is 5 million years old. Lucy is what, 4 million years old? And I was just talking about the last 2.4 for our genus Homo.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's it, and if think about it, we can't emotionally really get our minds around time sequences much beyond our grandparents or maybe great grandparents. Why would that be? Because that was all that was useful. And there's nothing
Right.
useful for me to think about hunter gatherers 2 million years ago, but it's crucial for me to be able to think about my grandparents, maybe my great grandparents, but that's it. And so we have an
Wow.
emotional sense of time that just goes back a couple generations. And that's why it's intellectually very hard to wrap our minds around and even begin emotionally to map our minds around the actual time sequences involved.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just, I find it stunning. So again, you always want to keep in mind that all these mechanisms that I'm going to be talking to you about didn't show up in modern civilization. These showed up, and the highly specialized ones just in Homo. So many of the mechanisms that go into religion, as you'll see, some of them are 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 millions and millions of years old because they're part of mammalian evolution. They're like, probably some of them are 65 million years old when mammals start to show up. I mean, it's those time sequences are unbelievable, particularly when we start talking about the basic neonatal attachment mechanisms in vertebrate and in mammals. So when you go to your family physician and he asks for your family history, this is what you want to give him. This is your family history right here. Um, and, it's important to keep this in mind. Now, this shows the difference between a Homo erectus skull and a human skull. And the reason I put this up here is I want you to look closely at the front of the skulls, the area of the
Wow.
frontal lobes. A Homo erectus skull is, I think, maybe 900 cubic centimeters. I'd have to look it up again. We're about 1,400, but you see that the real difference here is in the frontal lobe area. Why? The frontal lobes of our brain are the social part of our brains. They're the interpersonal part of our brain. Ours is really a social brain, and it's those social mechanisms that define who we are. And if you think about it, we had conquered the physical environment one and a half, 2 million years ago. We left Africa. We'd maybe gone as far as Indonesia. I mean, we had conquered the physical environment. So if the physical environment wasn't shaping us, what led to what were the selection pressures that led to the changes in brains from Homo erectus to us? What was the part of the environment that would have been the selection pressure that would lead to change? And it was each other.
Interesting.
That was for the last part of our evolutionary history. That was probably the most difficult and challenging part of our environment, each other, that led to the evolution of our social brain and the mechanisms that go into religion. And it was pretty rapid evolution in the usual time sequence of evolution. And I think most people know this. We show up in Africa 150, 200, some now think maybe 300,000 years ago, archaic Homo sapiens, and somewhere 70,000 years ago, probably fully formed you and me, anatomically, behaviorally modern humans, and we leave Africa and we conquer the world, and we are the last surviving hominid. Neanderthals, Australopithecines, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, all the other members of our genus are extinct. And the question is why? Why are we the last surviving hominin? And again, it may be because of this extraordinary social brain. And a way of looking at this is that we may have achieved what the insects have achieved, which is eusociality or colony life. What characterizes eusociality? These are the characteristics of eusociality. And if you look at them, they are also characteristics of human beings. And so one of the ideas is that we are who we are because we achieved eusociality, multi-generational care of the young, cooperative care of the young. I'll let you hold my 1-year-old granddaughter. A chimpanzee mother won't let her mother or sister hold her infant. We have
Oh,
cooperative breeding, cooperative care of the young, division of labor, defense of a commune, and crucially, self-sacrifice, altruistic self-sacrifice. That's part of eusociality.
interesting.
That's yes, and think about all the self-sacrifice, all the altruism that we have, and that how religions use that. I would argue how they hijack that and use it.
Interesting.
And you have deadly self-sacrifice. Think of all the insects that sacrifice themselves. So you see suicidality in insects, you see it in other species, and it may help us understand suicidality in humans. So what I'm giving you today, I hope you can see, not only has implication for understanding religious belief, but it also is very important for understanding human psychology and even human clinical psychology and psychiatry.
Right. And that's also very interesting because I feel like we all know somebody who is very, very selfish, very, very self centered, puts themselves time and time again among any other people. And I feel like many of those people are also not doing well. They're very lonely. They have a lot of
Mhm.
problems. Even if they have a lot of money, a lot of times you can pinpoint a lot of issues in their life. And it's interesting to factor in this idea of self service and self sacrifice
Mhm.
as part of evolution and how to survive. That's very interesting. I never would have even considered that
Yeah,
part of the process, but it is detrimental when people are unwilling to sacrifice in any way, even if it doesn't mean necessarily killing themselves or anything like that. And that's fascinating. I never would have
yeah,
linked those two things, but I can see how
yeah.
that would be why our species survived and the other ones died out if they weren't willing to give any kind of sacrifice or compromise for the survival of their species.
Right, exactly. And the other thing that's important here is that we became ultra social, and ultra interdependent. We become very connected to other people and very dependent on other people and groups of people. And again, religions utilize that. Uh, and John Wathe makes a good point that you do have some selection. It's a small percentage of people who are extremely, as you pointed out, very self centered, very selfish. And most of the time they're miserable. But a lot of the time, they're the ones that become, for a variety of reasons, narcissistic leaders. And all of us need only look around the world right now, and we're plagued
Right.
by some very narcissistic and dangerous leaders. So there is also some selection for a small group of people who are selfish, self-centered, and unfortunately, we at times pay a heavy price.
And it's also a great example of how by being selfish and by being unwilling to sacrifice for others, you can still manage to negatively impact other people, especially when you come into positions of leadership and power. Your selfishness, even if people say my selfishness only impacts me, it really doesn't. Depending on what
Oh, no.
level of a human being or what level of power you have, the things that you do and the rules that you implement based on your own selfish needs can then negatively impact great numbers of people and great
Yes,
populations of people. Very
yes.
interesting.
Yeah, no, and think of Jim Jones. Think of the very narcissistic religious leaders. Think of Jerry Falwell. Think of, I mean, there are legions of them that have done. The narcissistic leaders in religions have done, untold amounts of damage.
Right.
Um, th- there's a uh, there's a nice statement by the late John Tooby that I like, which is you have to remember that for most of our evolutionary history, life was an endless camping trip with close relatives, and that's
Interesting.
the environment that shaped us. And if you look at those elements of eusociality and of group living, you can see that that translates into religions and religious congregations. They are often groups where there is a lot of what was described in eusociality. The greatest provider of non-governmental benefits in this country is the Mormon Church, and you can see that our extreme sociality, our extreme interdependence, altruism, cooperation, it's easily used by religion and religious groups. So, what are religious ideas? Let's now move on to that. Religious ideas are basically byproducts of cognitive mechanisms that were designed originally for other purposes. They are, in a sense, an artifact of our social brain. And they are always, all religious ideas are human concepts with just slight alterations. And as we'll talk about later, alterations that are memorable. Now, you can reasonably say, well, wait a second, Andy. A byproduct doesn't sound very strong. How could something as powerful as religion just be a byproduct? All you need to do is think about reading and writing. We don't have reading and writing mechanisms in our brain. Reading and writing is a byproduct of mechanisms originally for other purposes. Vision, um, language. Language is an evolved adaptation. Um, uh, and so you can see that reading and writing is a byproduct of mechanisms that ultimately arose for other purposes, but come together in an extraordinarily powerful way. Think of the degree to which literacy and reading and writing have shaped human beings. But it's not an evolved adaptation. It is a byproduct of other mechanisms. And that's how you want to think about religious beliefs, the elements of religious belief. They are byproducts of other mechanisms. And when they come together, they obviously become extraordinarily powerful.
This is so interesting to hear about, because you're absolutely right about that. Vision, things like that's so crazy. I never would have thought about that, how
Yeah,
the reading and writing isn't its own thing. It was developed by basically sensory opportunities that were given to us for entirely different reasons, and we were
exactly.
able to take those sensory opportunities and create something like language. That's wild. The way that
Yeah,
you're
no,
vocalizing this and verbalizing this is finally making things click in my brain. I hope other people too, as they listen to this, because I,
yeah. Well,
again, never would have even attributed that.
yeah, that's my hope. And I left out it's vision, it's language, it's fine motor skills.
Yeah.
You have very fine motor skills that allow you to write and write symbolically. Language, vision, and yeah, reading and writing is extraordinarily powerful, and it's a byproduct, which sounds weak, but nothing weak about the byproducts of reading and writing. And obviously, everybody here knows there's nothing weak about the byproduct of religious belief. This is a nice statement by Shelley. Um, uh, no attribute of God or religion, which is it is not, it is not either borrowed from the passions and powers of the human mind, or which is not a negation, again, a negation of something human. It's all human. All your religious ideas have, again, fundamentally, it's about something human, about something social. And to show you uh, some of the discoveries that we now have, which I think are extraordinary, here's just one study, and don't worry about the complexity of this. If I would encourage you to look it up, you can pull it up. It doesn't. There's no paywall. And Epley and others did these brain scan studies, and basically what it showed is that what you believe is what you think God believes. And it's just utterly brilliant research.
Wow.
They manipulated your belief, and basically it was, if you changed your mind on a subject, lo and behold, God changed his mind as well. And
Wow.
just a fascinating study that shows
Yes.
that what we think God thinks or believes is a projection of our thoughts and beliefs. And what these images show is, on the left, my beliefs may be different from another American. Um, I will see God's beliefs as different from another American. But my belief and God's belief, even if I've changed, if you look at the far right, if I've changed my mind on a subject, so now I'm for gay marriage, well, lo and behold, God has changed his mind too. So, but
Wow.
it's just it's a brilliant paper, and I think should have wider distribution. But basically, you know, what we believe God believes is a projection of our own beliefs, even when we change our mind.
That, and I feel like that will resonate with so many people. This idea, like you said, if you feel differently about something, if you want something to be correct, if something is the way that you believe or want to live or benefits you, suddenly God does too. That's
Yeah,
wild. I feel like the same thing happens with the Pope a lot too. Like suddenly
yeah,
the Pope has decided that that's okay as well.
yeah. And the Pope, I think we look at, obviously, is God's, what is it? God's vicar, or vicar, God's vicar on earth. And yeah, so we'll change our mind. But it's I think it's wild stuff. And the Epley
Yes.
paper is just a delight, and I think should have wider.
Yeah.
People should know about it, because it's brilliant research and just brilliant findings.
I'll link it in the description if I can find it. Absolutely. I'll
Yeah,
link directly
and
to
if
it.
you can, I'll be happy to send you the link.
Excellent.
It's just it's just a one. And again, I mean, some of the neuroimaging stuff is hard to read, but the basis of the paper, it's well written. Basis of the paper and the conclusions, you can follow it. It's just I just think it's wonderful. And the paper was already published, and I didn't know about it when I wrote my book, and it was like, oh, yeah.
It would have been such a great resource to have.
Yes, no, it's just such a great paper. Again, to go back to what I'm trying to give you is different ways of thinking about and understanding the cognitions that go into religious belief. And think about our ancestors, but you don't even have to think about our ancestors in a way. You can think about us, that our ancestors had to explain the world. And they did so coming up with theories that they thought would be simple, would be regular, would provide order, because they're living in a world where it is clearly controlled by invisible forces: storms, floods, thunderstorms, temperature changes, predators. That our ancestors had to survive in a world where they're completely invisible forces determining their lives. And so coming up with theories about thunderstorms, theories about floods would be helpful, even if they're wrong. At least there was an explanation. Now, another way of looking at religious ideas is let me go through the basically the psychology of junk food and pornography, because if you understand those, you will understand religion. And what is a McDonald's meal? Okay, it's a byproduct of mechanisms that evolved originally for other purposes, which then gets thrown back at us and triggers an intense supernormal stimulus. So all of us have a craving for fat, but it's a craving for the fat of lean game meat, which was rare and crucial, and an important source of protein and calories. You and I don't crave Brussels sprouts. Tubers and vegetable matter was readily available. We craved the things that were rare and crucial. And in this case, the fat cravings were of lean game meat, which was not easily or readily available. What does the modern world give us? The modern world gives us limitless high-fat hamburgers that can trigger that craving and a supernormal stimulus. All of us have sweet cravings. What were the original sweets? The original sweets were ripe fruit, which again, crucial source of calories, crucial source of sugar, and vitamin C. So all of us have sweet cravings, and but it's the cravings for ripe fruit. What does the modern world give us? The modern world gives us sugar, gives us sucrose, gives us Coca-Cola, gives us brownies and cookies. And I don't know about you, but if I have a choice between a ripe peach and a brownie, part of me is going to try to go for the peach, but that's a losing battle, and I'm going to go for the brownie. And I think all of us
It
are
goes
that
back
way.
to those genes making decisions for us. No, I swear I want the peach. And you're like, no, you want the brownie.
Right.
Admit it.
Yes, and the important part of this psychology is that for people who struggle with weight, you have to be forgiving of yourself. Hating yourself for having struggles with weight is so unfair and wrong, because we're all set up for this. Because again, the modern world gives us this byproduct of mechanisms originally designed for other purposes: lean game meat, ripe fruit, and throws at us an endless supply of processed foods that trigger huge supernormal stimuli. I mean, a peach, the dopamine centers in my brain might light up a little bit with a peach. The dopamine pleasure centers in my brain are going to just illuminate hugely with a brownie, and it's going to be hard not to go for it. And so you can start to see that the understanding of evolution, the understanding of adaptations, and the origin of adaptations goes to everyday life and some of the clinical problems we have. And I think the obesity epidemic is another thing that is helped by the understanding and the insights brought to us by understanding evolution and evolutionary psychology. And of course, what
And
are the
so,
French fries? Go ahead, sorry.
no, continue. You may answer my question.
And what are French fries are soaked in meat juice, right? That's part of why
Oh.
they're so good. You know, but I hope you see that junk food is a byproduct, is a cultural creation, like reading and writing. It's a cultural creation that arises from these adaptations, but come back at us in a supernormal stimuli. So
Interesting.
that
So
right.
what you're saying basically is we are I don't want to use the word addiction, but our draw towards things like religion, God, those types of like feelings and organizations, we didn't develop to be interested in religion and God. We developed these interests and these needs and these reactions and these almost like dopamine and endorphin hits for entirely different purposes.
Yes.
But the introduction of religion and the introduction of God triggers those exact dopamine hits and those exact endorphins. And so we crave it and we enjoy it and we get the same high from it that we would get from the original intent and purpose that we developed those processes for.
Absolutely. Well put.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And we'll see that, all part of what I'm going to now be doing as we go through the rest of this is showing some of these adaptations and how they come back at us and hijack exactly what you were talking about, these and give us pleasure and give us all sorts of things that aren't what the original design was for. Now, some people, I offend people all the time with the idea that, oh, this is a slide that somebody sent me that I just love,
Yeah,
that goes along with
that's
the junk food analogy.
I
But
didn't even
let me,
know he was gonna show up when I mentioned the Pope. I hadn't seen this
yeah,
slide. That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah. And somebody heard my presentation and sent me this, and I wish I remembered their name, but I just love it. But again, I do offend people when I mention pornography, and understanding the psychology of pornography is again a way of understanding religion, and it's the same thing. What is pornography? Pornography is a cultural creation, okay, that arises predominantly from the sexual desires of men, right? And pornography, comes back at us as a supernormal stimuli. And it is addictive. It can be addictive. But I hope you see, men are designed to be attracted to features in women that indicate youth, health, fertility, all sorts of markers that men are designed to be attracted to. And what and also men are going to be attracted to women who are interested in having sex. What does what does pornography provide? Pornography provides this endlessly at a click, right? And
Right.
so and and again, it's a super normal stimuli. Men can be flooded with obviously images and behavior of young women eager for sex who have the markers of fertility often exaggerated with surgery, implants, makeup,
Mm,
of various things. And again, a super normal stimulus that is, unfortunately has, I think, does a lot of damage. But I hope you're
right.
starting to see that the fundamental psychology is the same, a cultural creation, a cultural byproduct that is its basis, but then it comes back at us in a powerful form that's a
Wow.
supernormal stimulus.
Interesting. So the same exact manufactured hit that we get from, say, fast food, those manufactured chemicals that emulate the things we're craving, that's the same process people are going through when they're watching porn. They're having this craving, this thing that they want, and pornography is offering it manufactured, like you said, kind of hyper realistic, kind of
Mhm.
exaggerated in the way that hits all of those receptors they need to touch. And then religion also touches all of those same receptors
Mhm.
that they're looking to not only get what's the word I'm looking for, to get sated, but to get sated on a level that's just there. It's oh, there's a word I'm looking for. It's basically the hyper large version of whatever it is they're looking for, and it's
Yes.
readily available. Interesting.
Yeah, and as we'll
Fascinating.
see, as we'll see in a moment, gods are not just parents, they're super parents. You know,
Right.
they're
Right.
super fathers, they're super moms, they're the parents that none of us have.
Yeah.
Um,
Real life
and
is
it's
the
this.
peach.
Yes.
Religion and pornography and fast food are the brownie.
Yeah. It's just and again, the fundamental psychology of junk food and of pornography is the fundamental psychology of religion and other things. And one thing I didn't mention that with all of us have an appetite that was designed for environments where food was scarce. You were always on the edge of starvation. So our appetites are designed to eat more than we need that day because food was rare. So um, our appetites go beyond what our immediate needs are. And this is another avenue into the obesity epidemic. I've never met a buffet I didn't like. And I eat
Same.
too much. I hit a buffet and I eat too much and I get angry at myself. And it's hard to stop doing that. But the reason I'm doing that is because that appetite was not designed for the 20th century. That appetite was designed when food was scarce. And so if
Right.
there was food in front of me, I would consume more than I needed for the calories for that day or the next day. I would load up as much as I could because there's no idea when the next um, food is going to be available. And so, that's another thing that goes into this psychology is that the appetites for these things are incredibly powerful and incredibly strong because the things were rare. All right. Connected to this is um, what was alluded to just a minute ago. I'm sure all of you have seen or may at some point in your life participated in Pentecostal worship. And what are the people in the congregation doing? They're reaching up to an attachment figure. If you've been around a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, what do? They kind of stumble forward and they put their hands up. It's an attachment mechanism. They want you to pick them up and to hold them. And so that's what you see here. The Pentecostal worshiper is reaching up to an apparent, to an attachment figure, and it's that fundamental attachment mechanism. And they're reaching up to a parent who is, again, a supernormal parent. So again, I hope you start to see the link between the theories here.
Absolutely.
Right now, we're going to take a few minutes and do a deep dive into the attachment mechanism because I think it is one of the most fundamental, if not the most fundamental mechanism that goes into religion. And the attachment in humans, the attachment mechanism in humans was first mapped out by British psychiatrist John Bowlby and American psychologist Mary Ainsworth. And I would strongly recommend reading about this. There's a great article in the Atlantic from 1990 that interviews both of them. They were both still alive at that point. It's called On Becoming Attached by Robert Caron, and it'll start to give you a flavor for the human attachment mechanism. And this is present in all religions. Our attachment mechanism to caregivers, to parental substitutes is what is triggered and what is evoked in religion, the basic attachment mechanism. And it's a supernormal parent. It's a parent who's more reliable than your own parent. It's a parent who can give you more than your own parent. And this is throughout religious literature. And I'm going to be obviously focused most on Christian religion, but you will see this in other faiths as well. Psalm 27, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Again, the Lord is a more reliable, better parent than one's own, a supernormal parent. Now, when I think of the most important set of ideas comes from a neuroscientist named John Wathay, and mapping out how the neonatal and early infant attachment mechanisms are some of the most crucial, in a sense, maybe even the basic DNA of religion. And if you think about it, when mammals are born, when vertebrate animals, when mammals are born, they don't need to learn about the presence of a mother. They don't need to learn about the presence of feeding. They know there's a mother there. They know that mother is going to feed them. They orient towards the source of food, the breast, and that there's this, we're basically already born with a hardware in our brains that early, and again, language is tough in this, it's a sense that you want to call it a maternal image, a mother program. This is in our brains. And if you are interested in this, I cannot recommend more highly John Wathay's book, The Illusion of God's Presence. And he has a new book out which goes more through the neuroscience, the phantom God. But if I'm obviously partial to my little book, but if you've got one book in you on this subject, I would look at John's book, because it's just tremendous. And what I'm going to give you now comes from John's work. And I think it's utterly crucial. And I think more people need to know about it. And so you have this innate neural model that mothers exist with certainty, that mothers know how to help, that mothers are able to, want to, and will help, particularly when they hear crying. They will respond. You're born into the world, and that's a given. And if you've been around newborns, if you step back from it, think about it. They don't have to learn any of this. They come into the world with this complex, innate neuronal model of this set of features. How does that show up in religion? Think about the people that have absolute certainty of faith. That's like the certainty that mothers exist. Think about, the infants come into the world, they know that mothers will help, and they know how to help. That easily translates into the sense of God's being omniscient. Mothers are able to, want to, and will help. They're omnipotent. They're there, and they will be able to take care of you.
That's interesting.
Yes. No, this is why I think, as I said, if you've got one book, in you on this subject, The Illusion of God's Presence is something you want to read. And I want you to now think of prayer as a call for help, as prayer is a manifestation of, or persistence of, neonatal infant crying. It's a call for help from a mother exists. That's what praying is. And it's even more interesting, I think, and this is one of John's observations. Think about an infant who's nursing at the breast. What do? Their hands, look at an infant who's nursing, and oftentimes you will see them in this position with their hands.
Interesting. This is so fascinating.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, it it is wild stuff.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
so again, what is communion? Communion is feeding an infant. What do we do as adults? We go up to the priest and we're down on our knees in a very childlike position being fed, right? It's a persistence into adulthood of this innate uh, infant model of being fed by a mother. That's what communion is, right? And you're taking the blood of Christ. Um, but that's what this is. Again, a persistence into adulthood of these basic behaviors.
Right.
Now, I chose this slide because if you look at this child, the child is nursing on the woman's left breast. And in this case, the child is not in a prayerful mode with the two hands together. What is the child doing? The child is manipulating the mother's right breast. And if you've been around nursing infants, they often are using one hand to tweak or to move the mother's other nipple. And John's argument is that when you see people praying and they have to have something in their hands to manipulate it, it's again a distant echo of that early infant behavior.
Right. Especially when you think about how so much of at least North American Christian religions, they use the literal terms of God and Father to talk about God, to talk about Jesus. There's a very parental relationship there as
Yeah,
well that they don't even hide. It's not even like, oh, this is
right.
something I wouldn't have thought of. They literally tell you that God is your father and that, Jesus is the son of God. So there's very much parental relationships being used there as well.
Absolutely. And the Catholics get uncomfortable with too much of that. So the Virgin Mary also has to be worshiped. And
Right.
there's a mother with an infant who's worshiped.
Right.
And the majority of your Catholic saints are women. And are worshipped. So there's the maternal piece of this.
Wow.
And again, if you look at religious literature, there it is. This is Psalm 131. But I have calmed and quieted myself. I am like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child, I am content. So again, the breastfeeding image at the innate infantile model, neonatal model in religion and the Lord as mother. Here's another example from the Old Testament, Isaiah. So that you may be suckled and satisfied from her consoling breast, so that you may drink deep with delight from her generous nipple. You will be suckled, carried on her hip, and fondled in her lap. As a mother comforts her child, so I, the Lord, shall comfort you. You will be comforted in Jerusalem. Obviously,
Wow, that
direct,
one's just blatant. Yep.
isn't it? Yeah, it's just, but
Yeah.
it's direct. It's right there. So those are two Old Testament. Also, it's in the New Testament. Um, as a newborn, babes, desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. And these are
Mm,
just three examples of many that John details in his book of the explicit image of a neonate, of an early infant feeding, breastfeeding, and those are explicit. And he has others that are um, pretty clearly implicit. Think of a newborn. If you've ever held a newborn and have momentarily, if you just momentarily sort of drop them, either deliberately or inadvertently, just drop them a little bit, they react with the Moro reflex, which is that primate grasping reflex. Remember the picture I showed you earlier
right.
of the gorilla infant grasping on. Again, these are part of this innate neural model that mothers exist. They're there. They will feed you. They will take care of you. That those neuronal circuits are in all of our brains. They were crucial to our survival. and as we'll see, they persist into adulthood. So again, mothers nourish. Also, we're born with the idea that mothers have a face, a melodic voice. And again, these circuits persist into adulthood. And as we'll see, they're also used in other relationships. Most of us, we call our romantic partners by childlike names. That's just one other instance of it. And we'll go into it a little bit more, but even these early neonatal infantile circuits go into all of our other relationships, friendships, colleagues, but particularly romantic partners. These circuits, particularly when we're stressed, are the ones that can create the illusion of a loving presence, particularly when we're feeling helpless. And I think if all of us look at our history, there probably have been moments, even if we're not religious, but particularly if we're religious, where when we're highly stressed, we will have a sensation that there's somebody else there, that there's a presence.
Right.
And I think all of us have probably had such an experience. And for a lot of people, it is that experience, if they are not religious, that leads to conversions. That they had a presence, and that presence must have been God in their moment of dire need. And again, it's utilizing, hijacking that basic infant neonatal neural circuit. So again, the essence of infancy is when we are infants, we're helpless, we have no control, and we are absolutely dependent on a higher power. And in our species, this is going to be particularly powerful. Why? Because we don't reach primate birth maturity until we're a year old. Human gestation is actually 21 months, 9 months in utero. And then for the first year of our lives, we are basically external fetuses. We are helpless and we are at the mercy of the world. And it is utterly crucial that we have a mother or maternal figure to take care of us, protect us, feed us, clothe us. And that's what led to the evolution of these powerful circuits in human beings. And those circuits persist and are utilized in many different ways. Now, I've been focusing on the Christian religion, obviously, because that's the one I know, but this is in other religions. In Hinduism, if you look up, they have womb rooms or womb boxes.
Wow.
And this is a picture of a womb room in a Hindu temple. If you remember the coronation of King Charles, and
I'm still not used to hearing him called King Charles.
yes, no, I live in a household full of royalists, and so I I hear about it all the time, and
Right.
my daughter lives in England, and so
Oh, wow.
And since he and I are about the same age, I think, I will admit I watched some of the coronation. I can't claim it was all for academic reasons. Because, well, again, I think it also illustrates, but here's where I'm in a sense illustrating my own talk here.
Right.
Because, intellectually, I don't think much of the monarchy. I don't think much of the royal family. I think, that's long since outlived its usefulness. But I do still have grudging, respect for and even some affection for the late queen. But,
Right.
I can say, well, I was looking at the coronation for academic reasons. No, I mean, I was kind of interested. And so
Right.
I did watch some of it. And I'm assuming, that some people in the audience watched some of the coronation. And if you did, you'll recognize these things. If you didn't, I'll point out why I'm showing some of these things. again, when you look at this picture of the coronation, I want you to look closely at either side. Who is surrounding Charles here? It's children. Okay. The
Mm,
people closest to him are children. And the coronation was basically a Christian religious service.
right.
And all the elements of religion you can find in the coronation, all the elements of the Christian religion you can find in the coronation. And I'm just going to give you some pieces of it so you'll see. But look who's closest to him. They're all children, right? The choir. It was a boys' choir. Children,
Right.
right? Right. And again, they're evoking attachment mechanism. They're evoking caretaking of children. They're evoking one's own childhood experiences. Again, it's deliberately, well, I don't know if it's conscious deliberate, but you can see how religions hijacks those early attachment systems. And here you see it in the coronation. Now, again, think about your own childhood. Think about the childhood of those around you right now. What do we do to soothe a child? We rock a child. What does a child experience in the womb? There's constant movement. How do you get a child when you're pregnant to quiet? You may sit in a rocking chair. You may take a walk. That vestibular stimuli quiet an infant, probably quiet a fetus, certainly quiet a child. And, hopefully all of us have had good aspects of our childhood, and some of that was probably being rocked in a parent's lap. What do you see in religion? Think of the men davening at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, the rhythmic movement. Um, Again, one of the outstanding, and this isn't me, but everybody talked about how one of the most outstanding pieces of the coronation was the singing of the Ascension Gospel Choir. And
Mm,
that choir, if you watch the clip, probably one of the things that made them so good, in addition to their singing, was that they were moving. This beautiful rhythmic movement that went along with the hymn they sang, right? The movement. Think about men at prayer in the Muslim faith. Again, that's very rhythmic. It's as we'll talk about later, it's like a dance, and as I'll show you, it stimulates very specific neurochemicals. I'd like everybody for a moment, if you would, is just to think about your favorite hymns, or if you're of another faith or raised in another faith, the chants, the hymns, whatever it was close to music. And I would submit to you that almost all of that music, all of those hymns, all of those chants echo lullabies, and even the what's called motherese, which is how we talk. Motherese is the language we use when we talk to infants. And just think about the recent Christmas carols: Silent Night, Holy Night. Um, all is, just think of the verses. Um, I, I grew up hearing gospel music.
right.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming
Yep.
for to carry me home. In the garden, he walked with me, he talked with me, what he told me I was his own. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. And I'll pause here for a moment and just think about, your favorite hymns, and sing a few lines to yourself. And I would submit to you, they all echo attachment, early childhood attachment, lullabies, motherese.
And very much like a survival message, where in order to
Mhm.
survive, in order to get through this, in order to find happiness, in order to feel joy, I have to have this relationship with God.
Yes. I once was lost, but now I'm found.
Yeah, the idea that without God you were lost.
Right.
is very prominent in so many of those songs, that you were
Yeah.
worse off when you didn't know God, and you're always going to be better as long as you know God.
Yeah. As long as you know God, as long as you are committed and attached to God, and in a childlike position. And again, if you find this interesting, this again is detailed in John Wathe's book. And again, if you think of your gospel choirs, how many of them utilize a child as a solo artist? Think of the early childhood of Aretha Franklin, singing in her father's church and being the solo singer in the choir. What about Messiah myths? Most religions have Messiah myths, return of the Messiah. And if you look closely, what is that? It's the return of a parent who will rescue you and your group, a powerful, supernormal parent that will return and save us. So again, I'm hoping you're seeing that the embeddedness of the attachment system in religion. Next chapter, hard to fake, costly, honest signaling.
Mm.
In our species, we have language. And with the evolution of language became the evolution of the ability to lie, to not tell the
Oh.
truth. So if I tell you I'm depressed, how do you know I'm depressed? I could be lying to you. If I cut my wrist, that is a hard to fake, costly, honest signal of distress, right? Okay. If I'm in love with you and want to marry you, how do I communicate that? A diamond ring. A diamond ring is a hard to fake, costly signal of commitment. If I am in an organization, and how do I demonstrate that I'm committed to the organization? On a hot August day, I may go out and pick up trash along the highway. That's a hard to fake, costly, honest signal of commitment to that group. And what do you see in religions? You see hard to fake, costly, honest signaling of commitment to that faith. And and these are just examples of it. You see the men at the Wailing Wall. You see I assume they're Slavic Orthodox worshipers jumping in freezing water. You see I think these are Shia Muslim whipping their backs to bloody, to bleeding. And obviously the man on the upper right corner in the slide, I don't think anybody would doubt his commitment to the faith. I mean, an obvious self-harm right in front of you. So this is hard to fake, costly, honest signaling, which again is part of everyday life. We signal people by hard to fake, costly behaviors or measures.
And I appreciate the emphasis on the hard to fake or hard to emulate, because not only are you being asked to make these sacrifices and to do things, but you're being asked to do things that are so difficult to pretend to do, or so difficult to pretend to live a certain lifestyle, that they're basically guaranteeing you're being made to have to do these things, or you're being made to suffer in some way, or
Yeah.
you're doing something that nobody who is sane basically would try to pretend to do.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
And if you don't do it, that's a signal that you may not
Right.
be committed to the group.
Right. Not only is it painful or expensive or time consuming, but everyone's watching to make sure you're doing it.
Yes. You're being watched for your devotion.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets important, because people ask, well, why are so many gods wrathful? Because they have to police cooperation, right? How do I know somebody is an honest, good citizen? Um, do I have to know his bank account? Do I have to know all the details of his life to see if he's cheated? No, I can probably make a good estimate of the person's character based on his hard to fake, costly, honest signals. Is he a devoted member of a group? But obviously, in many societies, is he a devoted member of the religion that is making sacrifice? And again, I'm obviously giving you pieces of all this, but I hope you see how it weaves together. Go back to eusociality. What's one of the characteristics of eusociality and ultra cooperativeness? It's self-sacrifice. And so hard to fake, costly, honest signals of commitment are often mechanisms of self-sacrifice. This is also important because it may help us understand one of the central pieces of the Christian faith, which always appalled me as a child, and I think appall a lot of people. And that is, what's the connection between the crucifixion and who is it? Isaac sacrifice of his. Is it Isaac sacrifice his son? I'm blocking on.
Sorry, God.
It's just so appalling. I forget
Yeah.
who, but I can't remember
It
now.
is
it's not Isaac.
No, it's not Isaac. It's sorry, I'm choking on my own saliva. Excuse me. It is Abraham.
Abraham, thank you.
Isaac was the son. It took me too long to think about
that. That name just exited my memory. Let's start this segment over if it's okay.
Perfect, can do.
Yeah, let me take a drink here and start over.
I just happened to swallow my own saliva the minute you asked me a question.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, it's like, Jesus, why the hell can't I remember that? I mean, that's so, but I mean, but again, I tell you, I think part of the psychology, I mean, maybe I can't remember as a function of old age, but maybe I can't remember because as a child, it was just so appalling. I mean, I was a son. Is somebody going to kill me?
Right.
It's like, holy, it's like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
God
it's like not even asking you to sacrifice yourself, but asking you to sacrifice your only son. That's a lot.
And I was a son. Who's going to kill me?
Right.
I knew there were I knew there were times that I annoyed my father, but really, I mean, but yeah. So let's go back and do this again. All right. So these are hard to fake, costly, honest signals. And it may help us understand something that if you were Christian, I think, at least it did for me, is utterly appall me, which is the crucifixion and Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son. And it goes back, I want to show you, because again, I think this is important. It goes back to show you how there are multiple things that go into these. So there's a hard to fake, costly, honest signal. God is asking, how committed are you to me? Are you committed enough that you will sacrifice your own son? And Abraham is committed to God. So he's committed to that relationship. That's an attachment relationship with a parent. So he's committed to that relationship with God, so much so that he's willing to carry out the awfulness of sacrificing his own son. So it's a signal to God, a hard to fake, costly, honest signal that he was willing to kill his own son. He was so committed to God. Now, what about the crucifixion? Again, it flips a bit, but it's the same thing. Remember what you were taught. God so loved the world, i.e. us. God so loved us. He was so committed to us that he was willing to sacrifice his only child, his only son. Right? A hard to fake, costly, honest signal of God's commitment to us.
Right.
i.e. God's attachment to us. So you see these mechanisms in two of the prominent scenes in the Christian faith. And again, I'm grateful to John Wathe for detailing this in his book. And it just, I don't know, obviously, what other people's experiences were, but these things absolutely appall me as a child. I always found pictures of the crucifixion extremely upsetting, and I know it confused me. And certainly, Abraham about to kill his son. And when I was a child, obviously, I was a son, and
Right.
it was very distressing. And when we were first talking about this, I couldn't pull up the name Abraham. I mean, it's that upsetting, I think, that, I even block on the name. So, what remember, I talked about how these attachment mechanisms are utilized for other aspects of human relationship.
Right.
And so, neonatal survival, parental caregiving, they go into our other relationships, and they go into particularly our adult sexual pair bonds. Those are attachment relationships, right? We also have mechanisms for incest avoidance, right? And this,
Interesting.
right? So, um, this is something that, again, um, you know, creates a problem for religions,
Right.
and you see this in and so there's this and again, I would refer you to John's book for details about this. But if you think about it, in the Catholic Church, the priests are brothers, the nuns are sisters. So any sort of sexual relationships with them are going to be incestuous, um, and it, it there's the need to control sexuality is crucial. Um, and think about adult sexual pair bonds. I mean, what do we call our partners? Hey, kid. Hey, babe. We may have, um, you know, uh, uh, names that echo childlike uh, emotions. But you get with the redundancy, comes um, trouble. And again, this is not all smooth sailing, because the redundancy of these mechanisms going into all our relationships. Um, uh, Again, what do men get turned on by? Um, um, Breasts, the original source of food. But then they're enlarged, they're supernormal stimuli, they're signals of fertility and youth. You know, the natural selection only has what would already exist to build on. So the early infantile attachment system, the neonatal attachment system, the young adult attachment, all of this goes into all our relationships, and it can get at times pretty explosive in sexual relationships. And in the Catholic Church, again, what do you have to have a vow of celibacy. That's a hard to fake, costly signal. And you're constantly around children. Um, uh, Catholic confession begins when you're 7 years old. I mean, that's a setup for grooming um, of sexually vulnerable children, particularly prepubescent, early pubescent boys. It's just a potential disaster. Well, not a potential disaster. It has been a disaster when you
Right.
think of the amount of child sexual abuse, particularly male child sexual abuse, that went on in the Catholic Church.
Do you think when these religions set up these familial type relationships, father, brother, mother, sister, what do you think came first? Do you think they knew exactly what they were doing when they did it? Or do you think they did it because when they refer to each other as those things and when they explain it in that way, they get that exact feeling and that exact purpose and response like evolutionarily, one of those like, oh, this is the best way I can describe this. You're my brother, he's my father, you're my sister.
Mhm.
Or was it more, do you think that's exactly, they knew exactly what they were doing? Kind of like a chicken and an egg. Was the biological response to those terms in that relationship what drove them that direction, or did they very purposefully build it that way?
I don't know. I think it's a brilliant question, and I think at least part of it is one of the problems when groups expanded. Remember, for most of our lives, we were on endless camping trips with relatives, with kin, and we have different relationship with kin from non-kin. There are all sorts of studies that no matter what, if somebody's kin, we have a stronger relationship with them than non-kin. And
Right.
so by calling people brother and sister, you're creating what is called fictive kin, fictional kin. So, and
Interesting.
it's a way of trying to create bonding. And think about what, and it's not just in religion, but what do we do with soldiers? We talk about them as being brothers in arms. Um, uh, and so you're trying to create fictive kin in many groups. And religion has to do that. For religions to expand, you have to do that big time. You have to say, we're all God's children. Um, uh, we're all um, brothers and sisters. And the priests are, the priest is a father. The the nuns are sisters. You're constantly trying to create fictive kin. Well, if you create fictive kin and you have sexual feelings, and sexual feelings easily arise with attachment, with people in close attachment, you can run into incest problems quite easily.
And maybe they also recognize that you're much more willing to sacrifice and do things for the larger group if you view them as relation and you view them as brothers and sisters,
Oh,
versus if you just say, oh, he's your neighbor, he's your friend, you're not going to do nearly as much for them when it really comes down to it.
oh, great point. Absolutely great point. We will sacrifice for kin more readily and more easily than strangers or non-kin.
That's
Absolutely.
fascinating. And that
Yeah.
kind of thing leads me to believe that maybe at a certain point it was deliberate. Maybe in the very beginning it wasn't deliberate and they just used the familial terminology just because that was the best way they could describe it. And now when you start to enter the sacrifice aspect of it, oh, what will make you sacrifice more? What will make you do more, give more, be available for more? Oh, I know. If I convince you these are your kin, these are your relatives. So
Mhm.
I wonder if at some point maybe it went from necessity to very blatant, they know
Yeah.
exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, a great point. I mean, deliberate manipulation. Um, okay, let's move on to the idea of souls and the afterlife, which is crucial to a lot of religions. This is a burial in what is modern day Israel, and it's an adolescent male. And as you can see in the grave, um, antelope horns were placed with the young man. So there's an idea 90,000 years ago of an afterlife. And early burial sites show this, that in our ancestors, there was already a sense of an afterlife. Why would we have that? And what I want to show you is that that naturally arises from our brains and literally the anatomy of our brains. And it it arises from something called decoupled cognition, which is a fancy word for the following. Right now, all of us can think about a meeting that we are going to have tomorrow with somebody, or we can think about a meeting we had with somebody yesterday or last week. We can decouple our cognition from this time and this place and this moment. And I'm sure, even if you were intently listening to me, there were moments as I've been talking where you've thought about something you have to do with somebody um, in the future, or you had a memory of something. But so you can see that we can move in time and place very easily. And we also have decoupled cognition with regards to mind and body. We perceive minds as completely separate from our bodies. And so that just sets us up for the idea of a soul, which is really basically a mind that is free floating and separate from the body. It's part of our everyday cognition. And I'm going to try to illustrate this with a fictive brain here. Can you see the apple?
Yes, now I can.
You can now. Okay.
Yeah.
So imagine that this is your brain, right? So this is your brain, and this is the left half of your brain. This is your frontal lobe right here, frontal area. This is the back of your brain. So this midline of your brain, the midline of your brain is where you process your own thoughts and feelings, and your thoughts and feelings about what's going on in other people's minds. You process that in the midline. My looking at my left hand, right? Where am I registering that in my brain? When I'm thinking about and looking at my left hand, I'm actually processing that on the outer layer of my brain, the cortex. So processing physicality is in one part of the brain, the cortex, disconnected from where I'm processing mind. If I had somebody standing here in front of me, and I was thinking about I was looking at their left shoulder, again, I would be processing that in the outer cortex. And so you can see in this slide that self-knowledge, person perception, mentalizing, thinking about what other people are thinking, all these things are processed in the midline when the cortex is where you process the body. Why is this relevant? Because dualism is just part of the architecture of our brain. Our brains represent minds and bodies in completely separate neural circuits. So we just automatically experience and believe that minds and bodies are separate categories, even though we know differently.
And would this be why the development of that specific part of the brain was such a big step in the process of why our types of humans continued to evolve and survive, and the other type that we looked at earlier that didn't have quite the same frontal lobe didn't survive as long?
I think that's an outstanding observation. Yes. My hunch is that our earlier ancestors did not have this capacity for really complex dualism. And we take it for granted. What I want to get across to the audience is this idea of souls is something that is one little step from everyday cognition, and that I don't have to have um, uh, my colleague standing in front of me to be able to think about what's going on in his or her mind, right? And so right now, all of us, if I ask everybody here, all of us to think about what's going on in Joe Biden's mind, we can do it. We can think about, well, what is Biden thinking about with regards to Israel Hamas? What is Biden thinking about with his terrible poll numbers? Is he sad? Is he upset? Is he angry? Is he oblivious to it? We do that instantly with no problem, right?
Right,
And we can,
right. I
and
remember.
Biden. Go ahead, please.
Oh, continue. No, continue.
No, go ahead. You had a thought, please.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I remember last time we spoke, that was one of the big kind of aha moments for me, was you were talking about how one of the main differences between us and other species is this idea that we can assume a response and assume an attitude from another member of our species without having to have them in front of us doing the
Mhm.
thing, or like I can tell you what my mom would think about something. I could tell you what my brother would think about something. So it's not hard for us to then be told,
Right,
well, what would God say? And then to implement whatever we think
right,
God would say, even though we've never met God.
right. It's just one little step. It's not that strange. And religion hijacks it very easily. It's just one little step. And and one of the things, if you go back to the very beginning of my talk, I don't think anybody got confused for a moment when I said, if you run into Mr. Jefferson next week, you could say to him, um, Mr. President, nobody, all of us can instantly imagine that, of talking to Thomas
Right.
Jefferson, even though
Right.
he's long dead and we don't know him.
Right.
But we
Yep.
we have an idea of what he thought. So in our heads, we can. It's just instantly we can have a conversation with Jefferson
That's
about these
fascinating.
issues, right? And and the other reason I put Jefferson in is you can see that ancestor worship is again one small step.
Definitely.
We can think about what, and I'm of the age where a lot of people near and dear to me are gone. I can have conversations with them, and occasionally I do. And I catch myself, but I can think about what my mother or father would think about a particular thing, and you know, these we just take these for granted. But this is the basis of the idea of souls, the idea of an afterlife, because our idea of other people's minds never shuts off. It's called theory of mind, and it never shuts off. So there'd be no evolutionary reason for it to. Um, so, uh, I could, like you were pointing out, you can think about what your mother or brother would think about a particular issue. You can just instantly do it. And, you know, in the, certainly, in the future, your mother will have passed away and you can still think about what she would have thought about a certain issue.
And you can also use it to your own advantage because, I think we've all heard somebody say, oh, they would have wanted me to have this, or they would have wanted me to
Oh,
do
yeah.
this. And I feel like religion is people telling you, God would have wanted this, Jesus would have wanted this, and you just believing them because it's not that hard for you to
Yeah.
fathom that they can understand without seeing God that that's what God would want.
Right. They know what God wants. They know what Jesus wanted, so they can communicate it to you, and you can think very easily. Well, yeah, Jesus may have wanted that, um, and we can think about it just and it doesn't seem strange at all because all of us can think about what's my boss going to want next Thursday when we have to go over X, Y, and Z. What's their reaction going to be?
Right.
And and we can, if it's an authority figure, we can, ask them for something, reciprocal altruism, you know, um, President Biden, I'll do this if you do that. Um, it, or in, God, if you do this, I'll do that. Or it's just, it's very easy. And as strange as it seems in religion, if you step back from it, it's just everyday cognitive mechanism that is unique to our humanity and is one of the things, as you pointed out, that makes us human.
That's
The
fascinating.
ability to think in the future and to have a complex social interaction with an unseen other, somebody we know, somebody we don't know, somebody we're going to be meeting. We just take it for granted, but it's an extraordinary set of cognitive software, and religion, hijacks it big time with the idea
We're
of
the only
souls and
species.
afterlife.
Right. I feel like we're the only species that actively has a reputation. I don't feel like my dog cares about her reputation with other
Hmm.
dogs. My birds don't care about their reputation with other birds. I feel like we're the only creature that says, I'm doing half of what I'm doing so that other creatures will think
Right.
this thing of me and will know this thing about me.
Yes, and you're and reputation is a social phenomena. It's not a standalone phenomena. You're pointing out you're conscious of your reputation because it's involved with what you think other people think about you, what you hope other people think about you. It's entirely tied up in this dualism and theory of mind.
That's super interesting. I've never thought about
Yeah.
it that way. That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
it's just when I read this, and it's a neuroscientist, Lieberman, and I remember reading this and it was like, "Oh my god, this is it." It's just brilliant. And again, I think I've already said this so that, think of how if I had to have the person in front of me to think about what they were thinking about, that'd be really difficult. But the again, the belief in some form of life, a soul, a mind, apart from the experience of the body, that's a basic setting in our brains and minds. It's just part of the basic architecture, the basic hardware and software, and easily gets hijacked for soul, afterlife. Um, Something that's related to this is that another mechanism in our periodic table, hyperactive agency detection. If we hear a door slam, all of us will startle, and we will assume it's another human being until proven otherwise. If a bush is rustling, we'll assume it's a predator, most likely a human predator, until proven otherwise. So we have these hyperactive agency detection mechanisms. And, excuse me, our ancestors, it would be very easy to assume that there's some human-like agent that is causing whatever is going on in the environment at that moment. And we do it in a joking manner all the time. Well, it's raining today because Charlie didn't bring his umbrella. Another concept that is important that I mentioned is something called minimally counterintuitive worlds, MCIs. And it goes like this. If I tell you that this tree, let's say, is out in front of a park near you, if I tell you that this old oak tree will do your taxes, fix your computer, schedule your appointments, you're just not going to believe it because it's too many violations of treeness. There are just too many violations of this. But if I tell you that this tree, on the night of a full moon, this ancient oak tree, on the night of a full moon, will grant one wish, you're going to be vulnerable to remembering that and at some level even believing it. And why? Because there's just a small violation of treeness. It's minimally counterintuitive. Everything else about trees stays the same. And it 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 has something that's very human. Somebody who will, or something that will grant your wish, that you can make a prayer to, you can make a wish to. Again, an attachment figure, a human like attachment figure that will grant your wish. And these are called minimally counterintuitive worlds. And um, they're, in a sense, a glitch in the system. And they're this optimum compromise between something that is attention grabbing and the expected. And it makes it memorable. Think of God. God is a human. God is a person. But there's some twists. God is sort of everywhere, right? Well, but we tend to think of him as located in a place. God knows what I'm thinking. So that's a slight twist, but it's a human-like twist. But if God knows what I'm thinking, why do I have to pray to him? He knows what I'm thinking, right? So
That's a good point.
yeah, I mean, but we still, but God is an angry old man. But even our conception of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, it's still just a guy. There are actually very few changes in basic humanness, but then there are these slight counterintuitive pieces that make it powerful and memorable. And those counterintuitive pieces usually utilize something about caregiving, stress, turning for help, granting a wish, reciprocity, again, things that have to do with human sociality and interchange. And most of your religious ideas are these minimally counterintuitive worlds. Think of the Virgin Mary, right? I mean, this is powerful. The Virgin Mary, um, uh, basically, she's just a young woman, right? There are almost no violations of young womanness, and she's a mother. The only difference is that, she didn't have to go through the usual prerequisites to conceive a child. And she's a mother, she's the mother of God. And then there are other things. She's pure, and she very easily becomes worshipped. And I think she's more easily worshipped, particularly in like the Catholic religion, where the main god is such an angry old man. You mute that a little bit with being able to also worship a mother, the mother of God, a god, and all the female saints. But again, why are these important? Because they hijack our evolved expectations of the world and the importance that we see anomalies. Crucial to our survival was identifying things that were novel, unusual anomalies in our environment. There was huge survival benefit to picking up on something that's different. So religions create something different, but something powerful, something that's an attachment figure, and there's not too many basic violations of humanness.
And then it also seems like they capitalize on, especially with Catholicism and American Christianity, they give you the hard, the tough love, the rules, all of those things associated with God. And then they turn around and give you the tender,
Right.
motherly, loving Mother Mary or Virgin Mary, so that, like you said, it doesn't violate too many rules. You don't say,
Right.
well, this whole thing is controlling and aggressive and I don't like it. You're mitigated with this. God loves you though, and so does Mary. See, she's so
Yes.
peaceful and loving, and the motherly aspect. Fathers are supposed to be tough and they're supposed to punish you.
Right. Right. You're right. And what does it create? It creates that parental model. Um, and it also, the other thing is, why do we have to? One of the questions is, well, if God is loving and caring, why is God? There's also this angry father, angry male. Well, for religion to be successful, it also has to have an agent who monitors our sociality. Remember, we're an ultra cooperative, ultra social species. Who polices our groups? And we have to have moralizing gods to keep everybody in line. And so there's this, as you pointed out, there's this tension. You got to have you got to have the strong, moralizing agent that enforces the rules of cooperation and sociality. And at the same time, you have to have a loving attachment figure, and a loving attachment figure that utilizes or hijacks some of the most powerful early infant, early neonatal attachment neural systems. And
Interesting.
yeah, no, it's just, and that's, to me, is that, this knowledge is out there. I mean, none of this, what I'm giving in this talk, is nothing that I came up with. I'm not a researcher. These are other people's ideas. What I'm giving you is a synthesis of knowledge that is already out there. That this is easily accessible, and I put it together into a package that I hope is clear and presentable. But this is knowledge that, again, we already have, and we started to have, in the late 20th century, and now there's just a proliferation of this knowledge, and again, powerful theories that are also like good science, are confirmed by a lot of evidence. And now, as I hope I've showed you, we even have very good neural imaging evidence that that shows you that when we're thinking about God, we're using, basic social theory of mind mechanisms that we use every day. So again, all these things get forged into religions, minimally counterintuitive, intentional agents, and they're omniscient, but they're particularly omniscient about, or they have strategic social information. They know who's been naughty and nice, and that these are human-like agents that interact with the world. And we have to worship them, we have to connect with them, and that's one of the things that motivates ritual. And what are rituals? Again, they're hard to fake, costly, honest signals. And what are some of them? Fasting, prayers, taboos. If you go along with taboos and you don't eat a readily available meat, and that's a hard to fake, costly. I mean, you're depriving yourself of calories. That's a costly, honest signal. We build powerful monuments. Cathedrals. Think about when you walk into a Gothic cathedral. What do you feel when you look up at that ceiling? You feel very small. You feel like a small child. And that's part of the power of something like Gothic cathedrals. They instantly induce awe and feeling small and childlike, among other things.
And I feel like it doubles down on, one, you've got the feeling of, like you said, being small, being watched over, being like a piece of a larger thing, but then it also has that back of the mind intimidation factor that's like,
Yeah.
look how small you are. Part of it's
Yeah.
to give you comfort, and part of it's almost threatening, like, look how small and insignificant you are in
Yes.
the grand scheme of things.
Yes. And again, thank you for that observation, because it's like, every powerful river has a lot of small rivers flowing into it, and they all come together for that powerful river. And that's what you describe. It is both comforting but awe-inspiring. It makes you feel like a child. It's also threatening. It combines all those things into that powerful monument. Why are Gothic cathedrals so venerated and have become such landmarks in architectural history and art history? And I would submit to you, one of the reasons is because they bring all this stuff together and create this powerful monument that hijacks a lot of what we've been describing. And also, building a cathedral is a hard to fake, honest signal of commitment to the faith. And those cathedrals were built by poor people over a long period of time. And we tend to forget that. But I think that's why they are so memorable, is because they hijack, in just walking into them, they hijack all those elements in our minds and brains.
So
Rituals. Yeah, no. Rituals. And people are familiar with rituals, and we're going to finish up on doing some of the neurobiology of ritual. But rituals are also courtship displays. I hope this cartoon is clear. This guy's very much hoping that this young woman sees him as smart. He's, thinking courtship. And one part of rituals that we'll get into, it's a way of assessing potential mates. And I asked a friend of mine about, her Christmas vacation, and she was talking about being a lapsed Catholic, but she goes to midnight mass because she still enjoys it. And she laughed and said, "Yeah, when I was growing up, midnight mass on Christmas, that was that was date night. That was she didn't miss it because it was it was part of courtship
It's
when
your
she
date
was a
with
young
God,
woman."
basically.
I'm sorry?
I said it's your date with God, basically.
it was both a date with God, but it was also a date with, the guys that were there were showing that they were making a hard to fake, costly honest signal that they were committed to the group, that, they may be good guys and worth considering as mates. Um, and again, religions are going to spread to the extent that they facilitate in-group cooperation. Any mechanisms that they can use to enhance in-group cooperation. And we've talked about those. And one of the things that we're going to be exploring is the way that rituals supercharge in-group cooperation, facilitate bonding and making it powerful. Also, religions are going to spread to the extent that they reduce the limitations that kinship and reciprocity based relationships place on group size. So, for religions to spread, you have to include non kin, and you have to include other people that you may have no relationship with, and certainly no relationship where you're in a reciprocal altruistic relationship with them. So, think of all the people that you may have gone to church with that you were not in a relationship with, where, you scratch their back, they scratch yours. And yet you're still able to come together in the same religious group, not kin and not in a reciprocity based relationship. And again, religions are also going to utilize, as you mentioned, our sensitivity to reputation. We are deeply sensitive to our reputation, and religions are going to want to utilize that and make sure you demonstrate that you're a good person and committed to the faith. And we have to have these potentially angry, moralizing gods to facilitate that cooperation and enforce reciprocity. But again, the original religions are ancient. And I love this statement by John Haidt, is that religions work to suppress our inner chimp, our selfishness, and to bring out our inner bee, our eusociality, our cooperativeness. And one of the ways that religions do that is through these powerful rituals. And Nicholas Wade made Nicholas Wade, who was the science correspondent for the New York Times, wrote a great book called The Faith Instinct. And he points out that if you look at the religions of the Kungsan in Africa, of the Andaman Islanders um, in the Indian Ocean, and the Aborigines, they are almost identical. And he argues that, these are obviously the three remaining tribes on Earth that are closest to our hunter-gatherer ancestors in Africa. Kungsan in Africa, the Andaman Islanders, and the Aborigines. And that if you look at their religions, they're almost identical. And he says that that's evidence for the original religion in Africa of our hunter-gatherer ancestors was probably similar and based on song, dance, and trance. And again, this is the Andaman Islanders, the Aborigines, and these first, and that other group I showed you were Kungsan, the men going around in a circle. And that first religion is based on song, dance, and probably trance. They're egalitarian. There are no priests or ecclesiastical hierarchy. That comes later, trying to control larger groups. It's the whole community. There's no distinctions of rank, and it is centered on rhythmic physical activity. And this looks complicated, but it's not. If you look at the three basic monoamine neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, they're all related. Serotonin's the original one. It's about 1 billion years old, and it's in all central nervous systems of all animals. And what does serotonin do? When we boost serotonin, it enhances our self-esteem. When we boost norepinephrine, it enhances memory and it energizes. And of course, everybody knows about dopamine. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. When we feel pleasure, it's dopamine, but also dopamine is crucial for marking things as important. When the things that you remember from this talk are going to be marked by dopamine and norepinephrine. And these are the three original neurotransmitters, and they are boosted in physical activity. They're boosted in ritual, and they're going to make things memorable, pleasurable, and enhance self-esteem. Everybody's heard about oxytocin, the trust hormone, and endorphins. And endorphins, we think of, obviously, their internal morphine. We think of them as analgesic and easing pain, but endorphins are also bonding. When you exercise, you increase endorphins. That's bonding. When you have wanted touch, that's endorphins and oxytocin. That's bonding. And this also, again, illustrates what we talked about earlier, how early things are used in later, more adult things. Women who are breastfeeding release oxytocin. When we have sex and bond with a partner, it releases oxytocin. When infant males nurse, you'll see infant males get an erection. When women give birth, sometimes they will have orgasm. That these, the chemicals for our earliest neonatal and infant connections and attachment, they're still used later in adult life, and rituals in particular hijack them and stimulate them. Darwin, when talking about music, said that he thought that music and rhythm were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. The musical tones associated with some of the strongest passions an animal is capable of feeling. And so, think about almost all our popular love songs. I mean, almost all of our popular music is about romantic love.
Right.
And again, romantic love is based on these early attachment mechanisms. Right. This is a wonderful experiment that was done in England. If you take a friend and put them on a rowing machine and have them row and on a rowing machine and measure their work output, and then you put them on a rowing machine and have a couple other people on rowing machines rowing synchronously with them, they're not touching. They're just rowing in synchrony. And you check the pain level afterwards on both in both experiments. After you've been rowing by yourself, and you check the pain level, which you can do by various means. And then when you've been rowing in synchrony with other people, and you check the pain level, and all you're doing is the same physical activity, same work output, but the pain threshold when you've been doing it with somebody else is much higher. It's much higher. It's much harder to elicit the same amount of pain. And the only variable is synchronous movement with other people. And so the idea is that, you're getting increased endorphins. Endorphins block pain, but endorphins also increase bonding. And so and what do we do with soldiers? They march in step, right? So when you exercise with somebody, I don't know about you all, but if I exercise with somebody, I can go further than if I exercise alone.
Right.
And if I'm running with somebody or biking with somebody or rowing with somebody, I can go further, less pain when I'm with others. right? So rhythmic physical activity, stimulating endorphins, bonding hormones, right? Also probably dopamine and pleasure. If we take a group of people and just divide them, ask one group to walk around the building a couple times, ask the other group to walk around the building a couple times, but in lockstep, right? And then we have them come in and do economic trust games. The group that walked around in lockstep will trust each other much more and much more easily, right? And the only variable is marching, walking around. Some people at Stanford Business School did this.
I
Now,
also
what
wonder how
about
much of that is related to, again, that reputation aspect. I wonder
Mhm.
what percentage of that is also them saying, I can't be the weakest rower. I can't be the slowest one. Since we're in step, if I fall out of step, everyone will know that it was me. I would
Yeah,
love to. I don't know if there's even a way to measure that, but I would be
that's
curious also to poll
that's
them and see.
yeah, you don't wanna be seen as the free rider. You don't wanna be
Yeah,
seen as the right. No, that's an interesting observation. Yeah, and you're gonna work harder in a group.
right.
But what's to me is interesting, so you work harder, you'd think you'd have more pain, but you actually
You
have less
think
pain.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild stuff. Okay, but what do religions do? We have these rituals that and you know the Aborigines, their rituals would last through the night. I mean, we're talking 12 hours. We're talking long periods of time where they're singing and dancing. Um, Now, touch. There's a psychologist, Jim Cohn, who did this amazing research where he had women in a imaging machine, and they're shown a threat scenario, and their amygdalas, the fear center, lights up, and then they have the person hold the hand of a stranger, and their amygdala doesn't light up as much. Then they have
Hmm.
them hold the hand of their partner, and their amygdala, their fear center, lights up very little. And the really wild part of it is that the degree to which their amygdala does not light up with their partner is directly proportional to their rating of the quality of the relationship. So if they rate the
Interesting.
quality of the relationship, they're nowhere near as fearful with the same threat scenario. So wanted touch is incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. And when if I just put my hand on the shoulder of a friend, just pat them on the shoulder, it's going to release endorphins and oxytocin, which is bonding. Um,
Yeah.
right. And so think about, at the end of religious services, what do? You turn around and you hug somebody or shake their hand, even though they're strangers. So, you know, sort of wanted touch. Um, if you saw um, Clinton's nominating speech of Obama in 2012, if you remember that, Clinton and Obama hated each other, and it was like the Mideast peace treaty getting them to
Right.
come together. And Clinton gave Obama's nominating speech, and when it was over, Obama walked on stage. Clinton goes over and hugs him. Obama is stroking his back like there's no tomorrow. You see a tear out of Clinton's eye, and these men repaired their relationship, and you could see it was a ritual. It was a ritual that involved touch. It was incredibly powerful. I remember watching it, and I was tearing up. And why am I tearing up? Because the whole phenomena of mirror neurons, in that if people are moving in front of us, the parts of our brain that would move in the same manner are starting to light up. We may not move with them, but parts of our brain are starting to move, and we suppress it. But this is why all of us can be powerfully impacted by a ritual that we don't want to be part of. But we're still vulnerable if we see these powerful rituals, because there's part of our body that is going through all the motions and even singing the songs.
Right. I
Right.
would also wonder if there was, like, say, for example, we went back to do that fear study again. if they would take a measurement telling the woman being used in the study, your partner is watching. He's not here right now. He's in the other room, but he's watching through a two-way mirror to make sure nothing happens to you. What kind of level their fear receptors might be on, or what way they might respond,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I would think that would also directly correlate to when you think God is watching, when you think God is there, when you think you can pray to God no matter what, even though you don't see them, maybe you feel safer, maybe your responses don't light up quite as much as they would if you felt totally alone.
No, I would predict, I think, again, that's an excellent observation, and I predict if you were just told your partner was watching or nearby, your fear center would not light up as much, and again, the degree to which it did not light up would be proportional to the rating of the quality of the
Right.
relationship.
Right.
If you had a good relationship, it would have even more impact. But, no, these are, but I hope people can see that. Now, think about your religious rituals and
Right.
the degree to which they involve rhythmic movement, involve touch, involve things that are going to stimulate these powerful chemicals that affect our trust, our self esteem, our connectedness to the people around us. And sometimes, as I said, even when we may, as non believers, not particularly like or be part of what's going on around us. Um, and what you see in early cave paintings, you don't see solo people. It's always um, um, multiple people, and often in some form of ritual. This is from Tanzania, people dancing. Um, One other thing I want to mention here is that when we make music, not so much when we listen to music, but this is why they want you singing the hymn. When you are making music, like singing the hymn, you're stimulating your endorphins. And your endorphins,
Mm.
again, reduce pain and increase bonding.
Mm.
So, song, dance, um, all those things that were in the earliest uh, probably our original religions, you see echoes of that in all modern day religions. Now, and you saw this in the coronation of uh, King Charles. I thought this was interesting, and they're constantly trying to promote interfaith dialogue, interfaith this, that, and the other. And why would they have to do that? Because no religion survived and prospered by tolerating its competitors. And
Mm.
if you think about it, and so this push to have interfaith dialogue is to try to overcome is to try to overcome the inherent hostility and outgroup aggression and outgroup bias that is inevitably going to show up in religions and religious groups. Think of the Shia Muslims and the Shiites. Think of the internecine warfare within Islam, even, which it can be murderous. Now, what I'm going to show you here is what goes into the basics of rituals, and I've broken it down, tried to break it down into some of its parts. But rituals are needed to supercharge religious belief. They also are a way of, as you pointed out earlier, checking for the people that defect, who don't participate, who are trying to freeload off the group and not willing to make the commitment. Often in a group, there's ritual punishment. You can't punish too harshly because the person might be crucial to the group. Rituals are a way, a hard to fake, costly, honest signal of commitment to the group, to the faith. And also, rituals are often heavily involved in courtship. Um, um, I looked forward to some Sunday camps or weekend camps in this particular church I grew up in, because I would have time to spend with some girls that I was interested in. What do rituals do? They often ease communal conflict. They often help solidify territorial defense. If I'm on the outside watching a group's ritual, I'm taking in their signal of strength, formidability, the quality of the group, the identity of the group. There's a lot going on. But one of the things we haven't talked about is one of the crucial things about group rituals is historically preparing men for war, onward Christian soldiers. Think of the Crusades. And again, if you go back to the coronation, when he wasn't surrounded by children, who surrounded the king? Soldiers. It was an enormous display of military might, and I think thousands of soldiers from all the branches of the British Armed Services.
That's an interesting juxtaposition to start with kids and then evolve into military.
Yeah. And again, showing all the elements, both the neonatal childhood roots of religion and attachment, and then the social roots of religion, as John calls them, the enforcers, the moralizing gods, and the group identity, and the group identity which is competing with other groups. Again, think of the Crusades, Christianity against Islam. I like this particular cartoon. If you believe in me, divide into sects and kill and hurt as many from the other sects as you possibly can.
That's really, I mean, it's funny because it's terrible.
But if we think of think of the wars of religion, which it to some extent is really the history of Christendom up through probably World War I. Now, what people may not have noticed is that most of the things that were part of King Charles's coronation, the various objects he was carrying or given, the majority of them were weapons. These are the things that were the things that were involved in his coronation. And if you notice closely, the majority are swords, are weapons.
I would love to know how old those are.
Yeah, some of them are probably pretty old. Right. And also, the head of Parliament, I think her name is Penny Mordaunt, she had to stand there for an hour and a half with the main sword.
Wow.
And this is where I part company. I mean, this is the head of Parliament, a democratically elected, democracy, a secular democracy, participating in an ancient Christian ritual that has pretty explicit elements of war and military might. And she had to stand there for, I think, an hour and a half with the sword. And part of her ritual was giving it to King Charles. So part of the coronation of King Charles was arming him as the head of the Church of England.
I just looked it up, and they were first used in the coronation of King Charles I in 1626 with steel blades dating back to the 16th century.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and here it is, still in modern day Britain, a democracy, a parliamentary democracy.
Wow.
The monarch being armed like, and he's also he's the head of government technically, and the head of the church.
Right.
And look at the gold. Look at all the gold. The resources. Hard to fake, costly, honest signaling of power and wealth. And
that's wild.
And if you remember the news at the time, I mean, the British taxpayer had, at a time of difficulty in the United Kingdom, had to foot the bill for this coronation.
Wow.
Millions of pounds. Yeah. But you can see the power of religion. But also, I hope I've shown you that the most ancient that we know of religions, the echoes are still in modern day religions. Let me finish up here with something that I think is interesting. Uh, it has always been thought that we uh, lived as hunter gatherers and then settled into agricultural communities, and then sort of more formal religions arose. And that's been turned on its head. In I think it's southeast Turkey, they discovered Göbekli Tepe, which is a temple complex while we were still hunter gatherers. So it looks like this was built by hunter gatherers, and they would gather there, at various points, maybe multiple times during the year. We don't know, but they would gather and they would have religious rituals. And one of the things that's interesting is that they brewed beer.
Hmm.
And these are some of the places they found where they brewed beer. And there's calcium oxalate and I think other metabolites from brewing beer. So they're fairly confident that these were used to brew beer, probably from wild barley. And why is this important? Because when we drink alcohol, alcohol does a number of things. Alcohol is our original antimicrobial. So, it helps protect us against infection. It helps us treat infections if we have them. So, drinking alcohol, it was crucial probably for the rise of great cities because there was no sewage system. But for our ancestors, they're brewing beer as part of their original rituals here. Alcohol also stimulates the endorphin receptors in our brain that are involved in bonding. So, one of the reasons we drink is that it loosens our inhibitions. We probably are more trusting of people. Our stranger anxiety goes down. So, our inhibitions are loosened. We're probably more trusting of people, and alcohol helps us bond with people, the people we know and we don't know. And then it looks like our ancestors, when they settled into agricultural communities, it was not to grow food, it was to grow and domesticate wild barley to brew better beer. And the original bread, einkorn, was not for eating, it was for storing barley to brew beer. So alcohol was part of early religious ritual, and alcohol may have been another factor in being able to expand the group, increase bonding in the group. And then when we settled into agricultural communities, which ultimately lead to civilization, the origins of it may have to do with brewing better beer. This is from Göbekli Tepe, and you see the dancing. And they also had, large monuments, awe-inspiring monuments. So if we look again at just take any of your modern religions, and they're going to have the elements of the original religion, the rituals, the song, the movement, and utilizing these neurotransmitters to make things memorable, to enhance trust, to enhance bonding. When you see men in the Islamic faith praying, I want you to think about that again as a dance and as an echo of the original religion. We think of Buddhists as men in red robes. No, Buddhists have the same rituals that involve symmetrical movement, singing, chanting, the things that again stimulate these neurotransmitters that supercharge the religious beliefs and the group bonding. Think of the men at the Wailing Wall. Again, in a sense, chanting, singing, moving rhythmically. And if people are interested in this, here's an experiment that you can do with some friends. is take a couple of people you know and think about how you're feeling. Just think about, do a gut check on how you're feeling, number one. Number two, think about somebody you're in conflict with and how you feel about them, number two. And then the third thing is to pinch the back of your hand and try to make it hurt as much as you can. Find the peak sort of pain. Just those three things: how you feel about somebody you're in conflict with, and pinch your hand and induce pain, right? Then what you want to do is put your arms around each other, around the shoulders. Let's say there's just 2 or 3 people, and then start swaying, rhythmic movement. So we've got touch, rhythmic movement, right? And then start singing your favorite hymn in unison and belt it out. Or if you don't want to sing a hymn, just sing happy birthday to somebody. And rhythmic movement, swaying back and forth, right? Touch, wanted touch, right? And singing, belting it out. Then after you've done that for just a couple minutes, and again, we're not talking 12 hours, which is what the Aborigines did, but you just do it for a couple minutes, and then go through the 3 things. Think about how you're feeling. And yes, you may be self-conscious for a moment, but think about how you're feeling, and I would submit to you, you'll feel a little bit better. All right? Think about how you're feeling in conflict with the person that you're annoyed with. And I would submit to you, you'll probably notice not being quite as angry or annoyed. And then try to find that pain threshold. And I will wager you that it will be harder to make that pinch hurt as much. And all you've been doing is the basics of religious ritual for 2 minutes. And you've changed how you feel about somebody else, and you've changed your pain thresholds. Huge.
Yeah.
And that's the essence of all religious rituals. All religious rituals have this in them. Every religious ritual has in it an echo, probably, of the original rituals that our ancestors created in Africa all those eons ago.
I spoke to a pastor once on my podcast, and I had him on a panel of Christian pastors, and he was saying, if you're an atheist, if you don't believe in God, he said, then how do you explain those moments when you're in church, when you're singing hymns, when everyone is singing together and you're swaying? And he said, I feel this amazing, beautiful, magical type of love. I feel this sincere love and joy and peace. He's like, I feel it in my body. How would you even explain that if you're saying that God's not there and his presence isn't there with you? And I said the same thing. I said, you would get that same feeling at a Taylor Swift concert if you really wanted to be there. You would get that same feeling in any music venue where you're standing and you're excited about it and everybody loves that singer and everyone's getting along and you're all bonding over the fact that you're all seeing this amazing show. You paid a lot of money maybe to be there. You would get those same goosebumps, that same bonding feeling. There's a reason why when people go to concerts, they feel that connection to all the other people that are there, and they're kind and they treat each other with respect and they have a great time. I said, what you're feeling isn't invalid at all. You are truly feeling the things that you're feeling, but it's not God. It's biology, it's chemistry, it's your brain, it's your body doing what it's supposed to do in those moments and responding the way it's supposed to respond in those moments.
Right. No, beautifully said. You're just evoking all of that and evoking the early attachment figures. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was just interesting to hear him say that.
Yeah. And I wish I had known this stuff when people had asked me that question, because at the time I didn't know that. But, people always ask me or say, well, why do we like gospel music so much more? Because it's joyful and people are dancing.
Yeah.
And people are dancing. And one of the other interesting parts of history that Nicholas Wade points out is that why do we have those awful pews in Christian churches, those wooden benches that are so miserable to sit in. Well, it turns out in the 14th century, that's when pews went into churches, and they were put in churches to stop the dancing. And so
Oh,
and
I
so
never even thought
people,
about that.
yeah, and so what did people do? They just left church and, created carnival. Um, but yeah, but the reason pews are in
Interesting.
churches, in Christian churches, is to stop the dancing. And now
Interesting.
yeah. And if you go to a African American Baptist service, people are standing through most of it, and the gospel singers are dancing and singing, and the people in the congregation are joining them, and it's just
Wow.
a flood of serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins,
Yep.
oxytocin. Right. That's why we like it.
Yeah, the feelings are legitimate. It's just not what you think it is.
Yeah. Or its origins are different than you would imagine.
Right.
Yeah. But and again, um, I think I put this in here. I put this slide in for the pews. Yeah, pews are in Christian churches to stop the dancing. And at Pentecostal services, again, the same echoes of the original religion. All right, let me finish up with this. Um, and if you can't read the caption, I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens. Was it the best of times, or was it the worst of times? It could scarcely have been both. And the point I want to make is that actually Dickens was correct. I think it is um, certainly, if you pick up a newspaper or turn on the news, it is the worst of times. Um, the tragedy of what's going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, I think it's just painful to behold. We're in the midst of terrible times right now. And I think if you're not looking or thinking about those two conflicts, there's misery around the world, and much of it caused by religious differences and religion, I would argue. Like Hitchens says, religion poisons everything. So I think it is also it is the worst of times, but it is also the best of times, in that we are the first generation in the history of the world that is understanding religion, is understanding why we are so vulnerable to religious belief, why we are vulnerable to generate the beliefs, what their structure is, why we're all so open to them, to believe them, to spread them, to teach them. It's a huge fork in the road in history. Again, we're getting increasingly close to a really thorough, comprehensive psychological theory of religion with good empirical evidence. And I think that leaves us with three basic questions. Uh, First, what am I going to do with this knowledge? Second, what are you going to do with this knowledge? But the
Mm.
most important question is, what are we, as scientifically literate, democratic, secular republics in the 21st century, what are we going to do with this knowledge for the coming generations? Thank you so much for your attention. And again, thank you for having me.
Of course, absolutely. One thing I love about your presentation is that it is informative, it's accessible, but also something I noticed while you were talking is that a lot of the information you're giving should, if people are thinking this way, should remove a lot of the guilt associated oftentimes with cults, with people who are deconstructing from religion. There's a lot of guilt in I believed that, I went with that, I did this thing, I said this thing, I acted in a certain way. And what you've done in a sense is proven that humans were made to respond to those feelings. They were made
Yes.
to respond to those thoughts and those stimuli. And so it's not that you were involved in this religion for so long because you're weak or because you're easy to
Yes.
manipulate or because you're dumb. It's because they literally triggered everything that they evolutionarily needed to trigger in order to cause your body and your brain to respond in that way.
Yes.
Which I think is so interesting because I
Yes.
think when people go through certain things, they often default to guilt, they default
Yeah.
to blame. But what you're saying is it makes sense that you
No.
responded this way
Yeah. No.
and felt this way, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. No. I'm so glad you raised that point because people will feel guilty
Mhm.
about having, absolutely not. As a colleague of mine says, guilt is the gift that keeps on giving.
Right.
Uh, it's so, but there's no reason to feel guilty about it. We're all sitting ducks for this. We're
Right.
all sitting ducks for this, and I hope I've shown that religions are just hijacking and utilizing the basic mechanisms that we use every day, that we've used all our lives, the mechanisms that were crucial to our survival in our ancestral history, but also mechanisms that are crucial to our individual survival today, our
Right.
relationships, our social brains. I mean, we're just sitting ducks, and religions arose from this, and religions hijack it to this day in
Right.
terrible ways, and there's nothing to feel guilty
Right.
about.
And such a
Um,
small percentage of it has anything whatsoever to do with willpower or
yes,
choice or free will. It has everything to do with this is the way you were born and made by your genes and your genetics and your development to
yeah,
respond. So don't feel bad about responding that way. Instead, take the reins on now what are you going to do with those
right,
responses? Now what are you going to do when you feel those things or when you feel addicted or connected to those things?
yeah. To know that it's just very human, that it's part of your human nature. Let me add one thing here that I think is important, and also part of why I chose this slide and for future generations. I would encourage people, if they're interested, to look up the essay by Nicholas Humphrey from 1996 or 97, I believe, and you can get it on edge.org, I think. And it's called "What Shall We Tell the Children?" And he makes a powerful case that a fundamental human right, a fundamental human right is that children should be protected. They should have a right to be protected from religious indoctrination. And I think that's one thing that we ought to all think about going forward is that if as an adult you care to choose religion, fine, but children should be protected from, seriously protected from. They have a fundamental human right not to be religiously indoctrinated because that's particularly a time of great vulnerability. It was a plenary address to Amnesty International, I think in 1996 or 1997. It's accessible. I think it's on edge.org. You should be able to pull it up pretty easily and read the entire essay. Religion should just have no part in children's development, and I think that's obviously, um, people are going to react that, well, that's kind of an extreme statement. I think there's more than enough evidence to back up his thesis and his encouragement to take that stance.
Absolutely. And there's so much data on other things that impact children young. There's
Mhm.
so much data on
Right.
things they shouldn't learn in school yet, things they shouldn't be exposed to, ratings on movies for a certain age, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. And it's interesting that when it comes to religion, nobody wants to talk about how maybe they're not old enough for that. That's different, even though we all admit that their brain is going through a certain growth process at that point in their life and they're easily influenced in certain ways. Nobody wants to talk about how also indoctrination is toxic at that age as well.
Yeah. No, and isn't there a Jesuit statement, a famous Jesuit statement about "Give me a child before he's 6, and I've got him for
Yes.
life"?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, that tells it all,
Right.
and you absolutely, because it's just, and I know Richard Dawkins has said this. I don't know if he originated it, but that religion is a form of child abuse.
Absolutely.
Religious indoctrination is a form of
100%.
child abuse.
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Dr. Andy Thompson, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I'm glad that we got to revisit our first interview and you got to go into more detail about some of the things we talked about. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge and your research and the information that you have with myself and my audience. I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about how this information is so important. It just needs to be more accessible. And so much of what you provided today, you even said yourself, can be found. People just need to know that it exists.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so important. So thank you so much for all of your work that you're doing and for coming onto my platform so often to share with us and with everybody who's going to watch this and listen to it. It's so important.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for having me. Obviously, I feel very strongly about this, and the thanks should also go to the researchers who have mapped all this out, who are, I think, not receiving the degree of recognition they should. There are a lot of people out there toiling on this question and researching it and discovering the things that I've laid out today, and I think they're the ones that we owe a deep, deep gratitude to. I think this is just crucial for the future. And obviously, I think all
Absolutely.
this material should be in any, you shouldn't be able to write a psychology textbook, an introductory psychology textbook for university education without having a chapter on this.
Absolutely. And for anybody watching or listening on audio or visual platforms, I will link Dr. Thompson's book. I will link Dr. Let's see here. We talked about, I wrote several things down that I'm going to link. I'll link several of the studies we talked about. I'll link Illusion of God's Presence in the comments as well. So you can just take a look at that either on Amazon or wherever you choose to shop for it. And I'll also link the oh, what's the word I'm looking for? The was it an essay, an article that we talked about here just at the end? The what shall we
Oh
tell the
yeah, I think
children?
it was originally an address that he gave to Amnesty International meeting, I
Yeah,
think.
I will link all of
There's
those
a
resources so that people can just access them right here, whether they're listening or watching the visual version. So those should be hopefully one more step towards higher visibility for people to access these things.
Oh no, again, I can't thank you enough. I mean, I just really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope people enjoy this and learn from it, and um, it helps them in their own lives and in their debates with believers.